My fifth grade student, she's grown up a little bit. We met Ashley years ago when we were at Life Center over in Lakewood, and we grew up there. Janie and I were her Sunday school teachers, and well, I didn't know we'd ever see her again. I mean, I figured we'd bump into her at some point, and then she comes walking into church. What was it? A month ago? I did this one time to her already. And she's been coming for about 6 months, I think, 5 or 6 months. And she has a phenomenal story of that ties in with our series. And our series is called Breaking Point. It's that point in your life. I think most people come to it where they choose whether they're going to continue to follow God, or they're going to follow God, or they're going to give up completely. And sometimes it's medically related. Sometimes it's relationally related. Sometimes, we can come to our breaking point. And the question is, are you going to hang on? So in this series, what we're hoping to do in illustrating people's lives in front of you and having them tell their stories, what we're trying to do is say, hang on, because there's hope right around the corner. And this is what God has done in my life. So if you guys would you give a round of applause for Ashley as she comes to the stage. Give her your undivided attention. And she doesn't want me to hold her hand this morning or sit up here with her. So I feel a little rejected. If you are offended by that, you can write it on your action card that's on your seat, and then we'll hand all those to Ashley after service today. So take it away, Ashley.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm just going to sit here. I want it to be as informal as possible. But Melissa was teasing me, like, where's your notes? And I was like, I don't have notes. I'm going to wing it. And she was like, no. And Shireen said no. But if you know me, winging it is my style. So this is me winging it. I've got my scriptures. Just like Jeremy was saying, yeah, this is a story about my breaking point. And it, like he was saying, it happens to all of us. They can be little breaking points and they can be big breaking points. It all just depends on each person themselves. And so without further ado, I'll get right into it. So for those of you who don't know me or don't know any of my backstory, I grew up in church. I was going to church since before I was born. And in order to tell part of my story, I have to tell a bit of somebody else's story that you'll hear more of in a few weeks. But my mom started coming to Life Center Church when she was pregnant with me. And at that time, she was the black sheep of the blackest sheep in her family. She moved here from the Midwest to LA to go to school and kind of came out here with nothing. She had a few family members out here, but was really kind of doing life on her own. And that was something that hurt her family in the Midwest. They didn't really understand why she was doing that. And then the cherry on top was when she became pregnant with me. And she was raised in a strong Catholic home. And so good Catholic girls marry good Catholic boys, and then they have babies. So when that order gets messed up, it was a big scandal. And so she started coming to church and kind of found refuge there. And fast forward to when I'm born, and we kind of go through life together, just me and my mom, buddies together. We struggled together, did life together. And fast forward to I'm about 4 years old, 5 years old, 4. And we're at her cousin's wedding, and the man who's walking the bride down the aisle is my mom's future husband. And so they meet at the wedding, they start to date. Very shortly after, they get engaged, and shortly thereafter, they are married. So my stepdad came into my life about that time, about 4 years old. They got married when I was 5, and my brother was born a year later when I was 6. And so when he came into my life, I was very upset because my mom and I were buddies. We were BFFs, and I was mad. Like, this is not gonna fly with me. This is my best friend, and you're taking her from me. Like, no, that's not okay. So all the wedding pictures, like, I should have sent some, but all the wedding pictures, I'm like, I have a stinky face. I'm sitting there like arms crossed, mad face. Like, I was very opposed to that wedding. I didn't even get to be the flower girl. Like, that is something that I'll always hold against them. But So I was mad, I was mad that this man is coming into my life. Who is this? We barely know each other, and they're getting married, and then I have to share all of my attention with a baby. Like, I was really upset. But eventually, I started to warm up the fact that, my brother is actually cute and he's a good time and it's fun to play with another kid in the house. So when I reflect on my childhood and growing up, there's not a time that I remember without my dad in the picture, my stepdad, and there's also not a time that I remember us really like struggling or having bad times or anything like that. I never knew my biological father. He decided that fatherhood was not something he was ready for when my mom became pregnant. And that was kind of a part of my life that I decided from a very, very young age I was going to keep locked and stored away in the tightest box that I could find in my heart, and never really reflect upon that. And I came to accept my stepdad as my dad. That was the man who, for all I cared, was my biological father. And I became very attached to this man. I really grew to love him as if he was my father and regarded him as nothing less. And so it became a point to where anytime anybody asked me, like, who's your dad, or like alluded to the fact that my stepdad was not my biological dad, I would get very offended and super defensive, like, no, that is my dad. And they're like, okay, but like, who's your dad, like, who's your real dad? And it was like, that guy, like, and they're like, okay, this is a Filipino man, okay? Like, he's dark-skinned, he does not look like me at all. And they're like, okay, I could see, obviously, you don't think that this person is my biological father because he's not. But I would say, like, no, like, I look like my mom, and my brother looks like my dad. Like, that's my dad. And that was that. Like, that was always the conversation, because I just wasn't ready to accept the fact that my biological father abandoned us, and that somebody wouldn't, even give us the time of day or give me the time of day to then decide, like, nah, I don't really want to be involved in this person's life. So, but again, it's something that I never, ever, ever reflected upon or even considered until my adulthood. So growing up, again, I said we had a really good life. We lived a simple life, nothing extravagant, but we were always given nice things. We would go on trips and had Disneyland passes, so that was fun. But I was daddy's little girl growing up, 100%. And my dad was a very permissive parent, and so that worked to his advantage because I am easily won over with gifts. So my dad was the cool dad, he was the cool parent, and my mom was the mean parent. And she was the one who was strict, and she was very, like, enforcing the rules, laying down the law. And I was a very outgoing child, and I always wanted to be, like, friends were super important to me, and, like, popularity in high school was, like, really important to me. So when I have one parent telling me, yeah, go ahead, do everything, like, woohoo. And then I have one parent who's like, no, you're not going here, you're not going here, your curfew is this time, you can't talk to this person, you're grounded, you're grounded, grounded. Then I was like, all right, like, you're not my favorite parent. This guy deserves an award because anything I wanted growing up, I got from him. Whether it was something tangible like an object, or whether it was I want to go hang out with this person, or I want to go to this party or whatever. If I asked him, the answer was yes. And if we had to sneak around my mom's back for me to get it, that's what we did. So that translated into love for me. That was him showing me love and affection because he wanted me to have fun. Like, okay, obviously he loves me because he wants me to have a really good childhood and adulthood or teenage years. So I was daddy's little girl, hands down. And what I didn't realize at the time, and wouldn't realize until my 20s, is that that was his way of building a strong relationship and a foundation for me to later be taken advantage of. And so we had a really good elementary school years and everything. And again, I'm in church at this time. Everything was good up until about middle school. And in middle school, things are changing, puberty begins, and a lot of my friends were like starting to become interested in the opposite sex and dating. Not really dating, but like, oh, you want to be my boyfriend and girlfriend? Like, we'll hang out at lunch, whatever. But I was a late bloomer, so I was like late to that party, and I didn't really like have feelings for. I didn't really want a boyfriend. I wanted attention of guys for sure, but I didn't really want like a boyfriend or anything like that. But around that time is when the abuse began, and so it was very subtle and very small when it first started, but it gradually developed. And because of that existing relationship that my dad and I had, no red flags ever went off for me. So it was kind of like a bonding time for us where he usually works late nights, and so he would come and say goodnight to my brother and come and say goodnight to me. And if I was still awake, then we would climb down my bunk bed and like go sit down with him in my room. And he had a phone at this time where this was a time where like cell phones were just kind of becoming like a big thing, and he had like the Razor, which was like the cool phone at that time. And I didn't have a phone because my mean parents said no. But I still wanted to like text my friends and be a part of the cool gang and stuff. So I would like give them my dad's number, and they would like text my dad's number thinking it was me, and then I would just like respond when we like had our time together. So that was like our time where he was like would like give me his phone to use. I would text my friends, play games and whatever, and the abuse would happen in those moments. And again, they were very subtle. I never really thought much of it. I just thought like, this is probably what dads do. Like, I don't know. And then it continued like that for years, where there were boundaries being crossed, and that abuse was occurring on a weekly basis, sometimes multiple times a week, and I never thought anything of it. But it wasn't, people around me weren't blind to it. And so my mom started to kind of get suspicious of maybe some things were happening that shouldn't have been. And so she actually called Department of Child and Family Services to come out and investigate. And I remember it wasn't until that day and that interview that I had with the lady who came that I considered like, maybe this isn't right. Like, maybe this shouldn't be happening. And I remember that so clearly. I remember this lady coming in to our house, and she was talking to my mom and this blonde lady, and it was kind of like a movie where like you're looking up at this like authority figure, and they look like this tall, scary woman. And I was a very smart kid, and so I had an idea of why she was there. And then she started asking me questions about my dad, and she focused only on my dad. And so that's when I was like, well, maybe this is inappropriate. But I was smart, and I knew like if I don't say, or if I say, what she wants to hear, my dad is going to be taken away. My dad is not going to be able to be a part of this family anymore. And I knew that my dad was the sole financial provider, not the sole financial, but the main financial provider for our family. So it's like the slippery slope of effects for me. It's like he's going to be taken away, and then he's going to go to jail, and then we're going to be homeless because my mom can't pay the bills, and then what? I'm going to have to not go to school, and then I'm going to lose all my friends, and we're going to lose this person that I care so much about. So I said, no, nothing's happening. Everything is fine. No, he doesn't come into my room or, lay in bed with me sometimes or anything like that. Like, nope, everything's good. And so her hands were tied because I didn't admit to anything. Child and Family Services came out again one more time after that because my mom was adamant, there's something going on here. But again, I didn't admit to anything. And so the abuse continued until I started high school. And once I got into high school, the abuse stopped, and we went back to our normal lives, and everything was fine. And when that visit happened, I kind of started to consider, like, maybe this isn't appropriate, but I never really considered, like, sexual abuse. Like, abuse was something that happened to people whose parents did not love them to me. And I knew that this man loved me. He proved it over and over and over that he loved me. He gave me anything I wanted. He wanted me to just have a good time. And so there was no doubt in my mind that he was not abusing me. Like, I knew for a fact that was not abuse. So we get to high school or whatever. High school's fine. And in high school, I started to exhibit the typical, like, daddy issue behaviors. So I started acting out a lot, just giving a lot of attitude to my mom. I was mean. I was not a nice teenager. But I started to dress a little more promiscuous, wear little short booty shorts and whatever. And I did this to gain attention of males, males of any age, younger than me, older than me, same age as me. I just wanted attention, and I never knew why. It was extremely subconscious. I never considered the reasons as to why that was happening, but later I'm now able to see that that was because of the abuse that I went through. And so, the behavior was exactly with somebody who had been sexually abused. But again, that wasn't something that would happen to me, so I never thought once about that. And there were no more instances of the abuse until my junior year. So I go through high school, freshman, sophomore, most of junior year, thinking like, this is in the past. I never have to think about it because it's something that happened this one time, and I don't have to reflect upon that. Until this one time, junior year, is the most vivid memory that I have of what happened. My mom was away. She was on a women's retreat with church. And my dad was just home with my brother and I. And this happened frequently. Like, this wasn't just she went on this one retreat. No, she would go on these often. And I'm 16 years old at this time. So I know father-daughter relationship boundaries. I know what's appropriate, what's inappropriate. And he came into my room, and I was scared of the dark. I'm still scared of the dark, but I was scared of the dark, so like I always slept with my door open in the nightlight. And so I remember like his shadow coming in the room, and it was late, like probably 11 or so, and so I think that he thought that I was asleep. And so he just sat at the edge of my bed, and just like childhood or middle school years, it was slow and gradual, so it wasn't just jump right into it. But sometimes when it would occur in middle school, I would stop him, so I would like brush his hand away or whatever, like more of like I was bothered. I wanted to like be focused on this, and that was bothering me. But never because I was like uncomfortable or like this is weird, stop. But that night, I wanted nothing more than to speak up and say something. I wanted to yell. I wanted to say stop. I wanted to push his hand away. I wanted to jump up out of bed. There were so many things that I wanted to do, but instead I just laid there and felt paralyzed. I felt like I couldn't move and I couldn't speak. And that was like truly traumatic for me. It was just a few minutes, but it felt like hours that I was just laying there being taken advantage of, and truly taken advantage of, because not only am I young, not only am I your daughter, whatever, but you think I'm asleep. Like that is crossing the boundaries, and you're really truly taking full advantage here. And so I couldn't say or do anything, and before it escalated any further, finally I was able to kind of move my body in a way that would insinuate that I'm kind of waking up from a deep sleep. And he didn't really get the message. So then finally, like, I turned over, like completely turned over, and like pulled my blankets up. And then he got the message, and I said, like, can you leave? And he left. We never talked about it. We just went about our normal day the next day, and that was that. But that was, as I said, it was a traumatic experience for me, because I knew what was wrong and what was right at that time. I couldn't say, I'm naive middle schooler, I don't know. I knew. And so again, I locked that in that part of my heart where that was something that I was never going to really reflect upon anymore. So we continue our lives, and then I get a boyfriend, my first boyfriend. And so we're like in love, and we're going to get married and all this stuff. Thank God we didn't. But he was a year younger than me. So I'm 16, he's 15. We had like a forbidden romantic relationship. His parents didn't want me with him. My parents surely did not want me with him. Well, my mom, because my dad was the cool parent, and I'm allowed to date anybody I want. So we're going through, our relationship or whatever, and he's 15, again, I'm 16, and I, again, had no desire to be sexual with anybody. I didn't want to have sex with anybody. A lot of my friends were having sex, but it was just like, that's something that, I want to wait, and I had a purity ring, and I wanted to wait for marriage, but he was this, horny teenager who just wanted to have sex, and we wanted to have our first time together and all this stuff. So I remember one day he asked me to go to or meet him at the park. So of course I asked my cool parent, like, hey, can you take me to the park to meet so-and-so? I said, sure. So this guy has to know what's going to happen in the park. Like, he has to know. So he basically drives me over to this park and says, like, okay, like, go have your fun. I'll be here when you're ready. So we're in the park. We start to make out, whatever. Things getting hot and heavy. And then he tries to touch me in my downstairs area. And I remember feeling triggered. I had never felt triggered before, and that was like a huge trigger for me. And I freaked out, and I like slapped his hand away, and I like jumped up, and I was like, what are you doing? And he was like, whoa, like that was a really intense response from me, especially because we were like, making out or whatever. So he was really like surprised and taken aback by the way that I responded to that. I thought you wanted this, like whatever. So that was the end of that. Like, we just spent the rest of the time walking around the park. And later that day and later that week, we were kind of talking about what happened. And he asked me, like, why wouldn't you let me do that? And I said, like, I don't know, I just didn't want that. And then he said, do you want me to? So I remember us talking about it, and he said, like, why wouldn't you let me do that? And I said, I don't know, I just didn't want it. And he was like, no, like, there has to be more, like, and he kept pushing and pushing for me to give him more reason why I didn't let him touch me. And so I kept brushing it off, and we were going back and forth. Finally, I said, you know what, fine, like, you want to know why? I'll tell you why. And I said, like, it's because when I was younger, my dad used to touch me and blah, blah, blah. And that made me uncomfortable, and it made me remember that. And it was so, like, matter of fact, and so, like, this is what happened. That's why. Stop asking me about it. And he had the normal response that most people have, which is anger and confusion. Why would somebody do that to their daughter, whatever? And he was a wrestler. He thought he was, like, this, macho man, whatever. So he was like, I want to kill him, like, I want to fight him, whatever. And I'm like, stop, it's fine. So this is a texting conversation that we're having. And at the time, my dad is in IT. So he knows about all things technological, everything. So at this time, he would often, like, he had a way to, like, look at my text messages, like, online. He didn't need my phone, but he could, like, access all these old messages, no matter if I deleted them or whatever. So he would do that, I'm sure. And so he had a way of seeing this conversation that I had with my ex-boyfriend, or my boyfriend at the time. And this was the first time that I ever talked about what happened, or the first time that I even, like, allowed myself to think about it. Because of that incident in the park that triggered that. So maybe a few weeks later, a few months, I'm not really sure of the timeline, but he rarely got drunk in the sense that, like, I never remember seeing my dad drunk. My mom says it happened. I'm sure it did, but at family parties, it was like the adults and the kids. So I never really saw that. But this particular day, he had gotten drunk, and he came home. I remember I was home alone, and he came home, and I could tell something was off. And he starts talking about how, like, he should have lived a better life and whatever. And he's kind of talking like suicidal ideations about how, like, he should just run his car into a tree. And I remember thinking, like, you're kind of being dramatic right now. Like, stop saying, like, pity me and woe is me. Like, you made all your life choices. So, like, I remember just being annoyed with him. Like, okay. Then he says, like, maybe I should just go to so-and-so's house so he can kill me or he can beat me up. And I was like, great. So I know he read that conversation, and I knew that once he set his mind to something, he was gonna follow through. And I think that he wanted me to, like, beg him, like, no, don't do that, like, please, like, it's gonna be fine, like, nobody has to know about what's happening. So I remember saying, like, no, like, please don't go over there, like, it's fine. He was just, it was heat of passion where he said those things. He doesn't really want to kill you or beat you up or whatever. But he went anyway. So he drunkenly went over to my boyfriend's house. And at this time, I was grounded. So I didn't have a phone. He didn't have a phone because he was grounded as well. So I remember having to, like, reach out to him on Twitter and say, like, hey, my dad is coming to your house. Like, please be aware. Like, I don't know what's going to happen, but he is drunk. So that was really scary for me. And again, at this point, like, only my boyfriend knew about what happened. So I was just sitting there at home, like, panicking, and I know that I can't involve my mom because that would involve me telling her about what happened, and I don't want to tell her about what happened because if I tell her about what happened, maybe they'll get divorced, and if they get divorced, we're going to lose our house and be homeless, and it all came back to that. They can't get divorced because we would be nothing without him. So he goes to his house. He's drunk. Long story short, restraining order was filed. Nothing ever physical happened. They didn't fight or anything. But their family got a restraining order against him. And he didn't come home right away that day, but he came home, and I remember the next day it was like everything was normal. We're not going to talk about that. We're not going to ever consider it. We're just going to lock that in a box. So we continue, I continue on through high school. Senior year happens. I graduate. Everything's fine. And then I turn 18. And this is like November. So I turn 18, and things are kind of weird between us. I feel like me turning 18 was like a turning point in our relationship because he was still the cool parent throughout high school. I wanted to go to a party after prom. All right, like, I'm going to lie to my mom, and my dad's going to take me to the party, and everything's going to be fine. I didn't go to a party after prom. But 18 was kind of really realize why at the time, but I definitely saw the difference in, like, interaction and his demeanor and his behavior. He was a lot more closed off, and he took me to my driver's test. The first time I failed. Second time he took me as well, and I remember the ride home was just really somber for some reason, and we didn't really talk much, and I remember it being really awkward. And there was one incident prior to this, maybe in the summertime, where I was home by myself, and he came home drunk again, or he got drunk at home, and he was telling me that I had to tell my mom about what happened, and that it was my responsibility, and that she had to know it was time. And I remember thinking, like, nope, it's not time. It's never going to be time. She never has to know, like, no. And I was, like, trying to rationalize with him, like, why it was not the right time and why I didn't need to tell her. But again, he was drunk. So I was, like, begging at this point, like, and he was telling me, like, if you don't tell her, I'm going to tell her. And I was like, no, like, that is the last person I want to know about what happened. And so, and again, at this point, I had understood that it was sexual abuse that was happening, but I had this delusion that somehow it was my fault. And so maybe if I did something different or said something different or wore something different at the time, those things wouldn't have happened. And so what happened to me was my fault, and that's also why I didn't want to share with my mom, because she would look at me different. She would think, wow, like, what kind of a person are you where these things happen to you? And that was my worst fear. As much as I didn't like my mom at that time, like, I respected her greatly, and her opinion of me and her love towards me really mattered. And so I didn't want to jeopardize any of that. And so I'm trying to, I'm begging him at this point, like, I don't want you to tell her. So I say, like, we're going back and forth. And then I remember he tells me, like, okay, if you don't want me to tell her, like, let me do this, this, and this to you. And I'm thinking, like, we're literally talking about you telling my mom about these things that you want to do right now in this moment. Like, how does that make that okay? And I was like, no. Like, that was the first time that I, like, put my foot down. And I said, like, no, we're done with that. Like, you're not going to touch me ever again. And at that point, I was just like, you know what? Fine. Go ahead. Clearly, you have no remorse for what happened, so go ahead. So he left, and he never told my mom. So again, we come to a time where I'm 18, and he had my laptop. For some reason, he was, like, fixing my laptop, and he used my laptop as blackmail to tell my mom. So I remember one day we're coming home from something, probably work. We commuted to work together. And he just said, like, if you want your laptop, or, like, he said, like, your mom needs to know now, and you need to tell her. So if you want your laptop back, like, tell her. At that point, I was over it. And I said, like, all right, I'll tell her right now. So I walk into the house, and at that point, they were sleeping in separate beds. And so he went into my brother's room to go to bed. And I told my mom, like, I have to talk to you about something. And so we went to her room and sat on her bed, and I said, when you called DCFS that one time, I lied. And I said, you were right. And I remember laying there thinking, all right, here it comes, like, the disappointment, anger, and I got none of that. Instead, it was like disbelief. And I could just see how sorry she was for me. And I felt that, like, radiating from her. Like, I could feel how badly she just wanted to make everything okay. And so we had that conversation, and I didn't really go into much detail, but that was all she needed to hear. So that same night, she's like, we need to do something about this. So we go to 3 different police departments because we didn't know which one was in our jurisdiction, whatever. So at the final police department, we get there. It's, like, late at this point, like midnight, 1 o'clock. And we say, like, this happened, or my mom tells her, like, this happened to my daughter, and we need to make some sort of report or whatever, and I understand that she's 18 and this happened a while ago, but, like, it needs to be documented. And I remember being with the police at that night and just feeling like they almost convinced me that I was lying. And I remember sitting in a room, so they had a conversation with us in a room, and then the police wanted my own story. And so I had to relive these moments all over again. And it was traumatic for me because I was forced to go into, like, vivid detail about the things that happened, and he kept asking me, like, when did this happen, like, get, like, dates, pushing for, like, dates and, like, more concrete information. But This is something that happened in my middle school years, something that I had blocked out for a long time in my life, and so I couldn't come up with the details that he wanted. And I remember him thinking and like expressing his opinion on how like, well, why is it taking you so long to come forward? And if this really happened to you, then you should remember these kinds of things. And I just remember thinking like, yeah, maybe I should like, but I knew that those things had happened, so I knew I wasn't lying. But he just made me feel like, like I knew he didn't trust my story. And maybe this is just some, teenage girl making up some story about her dad to get him in trouble. But that is one of the worst feelings that you could ever feel, is somebody not validating your feelings and validating your experiences and saying, this might have happened to you, but it might not have. When I sat there in bed every night that happened, and I experienced that, and I experienced it that one night in my junior year, and I know what it felt like, for you to invalidate my feelings and to invalidate my experiences and say, maybe you're just making a big deal out of nothing, that felt hopeless for me. And I almost considered like, this is why I didn't tell anybody, because I didn't want to be feeling like this. Like, why can't everybody feel like the way that my mom felt, So I told the police that night, and nothing really came of it, which is understandable. There was no evidence, and I had waited so long to speak up about it. But I had kind of a little hope that somehow he would be removed from the home still, because my brother was still in the home and he was still a minor. But I didn't have to worry about that, because the day after I told my mom, she had a conversation with my dad that he had to leave, couldn't be in that same house as me anymore. And I've never felt more peace in my home in that time. I felt like I had never realized it all those years, but I slept with fear. I slept fearing who would come into my room at night and what would happen at night, because it always happened at night. And I didn't have to sleep like that anymore. And it felt so good to be free from that. It felt good to not have a secret that I had been holding on to for so long. And to be accepted still by my mom, whose opinion and love really mattered to me. So they separated, and they started the divorce process. But that following week, that night was like my breaking point. And it was a point where I acknowledged and admitted to what had happened. I wasn't going to lock it away anymore, and I made the conscious decision to take it out of that box in my heart and talk about it. And that's where I had the decision to either let these things ruin me and make me a completely different person, because I had an excuse now. I could play that sexual abuse card, I could play the daddy issues card and blame my behavior on that. Or I could allow that experience to make me better. And so I was faced with that decision. And I chose to go through the hard work and go through therapy and confront that issue and confront those feelings that I had pushed down all those years. And because I wasn't going to allow it to ruin me. I wasn't going to allow it to taint the light that I had. There's a scripture that I want to point out that says, it's Luke 8:16. It says, "No one after lighting a lamp covers it with a jar or puts it under a bed, but puts it on a stand so that those who enter may see the light." And so that was a time where I was faced with an option: cover my light or let it shine brighter. And I chose the latter. And so the very next week, I told my mom, like, I have to go to therapy. I have to get better. And I started going to therapy, and I would go sometimes twice a week, sometimes just once a week, but it was no less than once a week for 9 months. It was $75 each time, and I paid that out of my pocket because I understood the importance of it. And it was hard work. The therapist that I was at, I had gone to before. when I was acting out and stuff, my mom's like, you need help. So she took me to him, but I knew how to like say the right things and stuff in therapy to like make the therapist think that like, no, she's okay, like nothing's not. I could play a lot of people, so I played like him and another therapist. It was like, I'm fine, and he was like, yeah, she's fine. So coming into his office and saying like what happened, it was like, all right, let's start this. And so we focused on, I remember he asked me a few statements that I thought of the situation, like what I felt. And he was like, we're going to pick on one and we're going to work on that. So the most important one to me was that I still considered it my fault. There was no way for me to look back on the situation and confidently say, like, I did nothing to deserve that or to bring that upon myself. So for 9 months, every week we're just talking about this situation, and we tried this new kind of therapy. It was like something with like sound and sight. It was super weird, but I'll never forget the day when I was sitting in his office. We were talking about what's happening, and I kind of just, everything kind of blurred out around me, and I felt like I was just sitting there by myself. And it was as if someone turned on the light in my head. It just flipped a switch. And I looked up at him and I said, this was not my fault. And I said it with such confidence and such like realization, where both of us felt that like that was the first time that I was really feeling like this release from this situation, because I knew that that wasn't my fault, that I did nothing. I didn't say anything the wrong way. I didn't dress the wrong way. I didn't act any certain way to bring that upon myself. And it was the most freeing moment for me, because that's when I was released from that experience. And so I continued to go for a little bit, but that was my healing process, the therapy. And he was a Christian therapist, and so a lot of the times we were talking about, God's plan and how this is, God's plan. And I remember thinking, after the incident junior year, I remember thinking, like, how could this happen to me? Like, what kind of a God would put me through what I went through in middle school, where like, yeah, okay, I didn't really know it was abuse. But now we're in high school and I'm 16 years old and I'm developed and I'm mature and I know that that's wrong. How could he put me through all of that again? And in fact, that time was the most traumatic. I can tell you vivid details about that night. I remember being really upset, like with God, like, what is your purpose in all of this? I didn't understand. And through therapy, I realized that there had to be a reason. And I didn't know what the reason was, and I knew that I probably wouldn't figure it out for a long time, but I knew there was a reason. And once I finished therapy, I realized that I was proud of who I was. I was proud of who I was then, and I was proud of the way that I handled the situation, and I didn't allow it to dim my light. I didn't allow it to cover my light completely, but I made the choice to make me better. And so if I was never able to reach a specific person with my experience, that was okay for me, because I was a better person because of it. And I think back now to what happened and what I felt at the time and everything, and I would go through it all over again to be the person I am today, because I'm not the person I am today without what happened to me. As traumatic as it was, as horrible as it was, that made me who I am. And so fast forward a few years later, this was actually recent, where I'd never, met anybody who went through any sort of abuse or anything. But I remember once that my therapist had told me that 1 in 3 women are somehow a victim of some sort of sexual crime, whether it's rape, abuse, sexual assault. But 1 in 3, and I remember that statistic, I mean, it stuck to me today, like 1 in 3, that's insane. That's 33% of all women who are in some way violated and taken advantage of. Like, that's crazy. And that number is probably a lot higher because so many of those instances go unreported, because people feel afraid to share. And so I remember like thinking, there's so many times where I walk into a room or like I'm surrounded by people or women, and I think like, how many of these people went through something similar? And it's heartbreaking. It is so heartbreaking. And I feel so much sadness for the people who have to carry around these secrets like I did and feel like they can't share it with anybody. Because that was a release for me. Being able to share it with my mom, being able to work through that with my therapist, like that was healing for me. But so many people don't go through that. And so fast forward a few years, I'm at a friend's house, and their neighbor comes over. And she would come over a few times here and there. And she comes over and she's like, "Ugh, I just need to get a break from my house. Like, my parents are annoying me." And I'd be like, "Okay, whatever." So we're sitting there and we're like, "What's going on? Like, is everything okay?" She says, "Yeah, I don't know. Like, my parents are just, bothering me." So we start to talk to her about what's happening, and she very candidly expresses that she was a victim of sexual assault. She was actually raped. And that she told her parents, and her parents dismissed it altogether. They told her that they validated her feelings the same way the cop invalidated mine. And they basically told her, this is something that you need to not speak of ever again. And okay, it might have happened to you, but not in this family, it doesn't. And so she didn't get the love that I got, the response that I got. And that was heartbreaking for me because I knew what she was feeling. I knew how brave she was to tell somebody, let alone her parents, from this strict Hispanic family. So I remember telling her, and my friends at this time did not know what had happened. I had still told a few select people what happened. And so I remember sitting there, next to my friends and not caring. At that moment, it was just me and her in the room. And I looked at her and I said, I know what you're feeling. I went through that. And I said, your experience matters. Your feelings matter. Nobody should dismiss that or invalidate you. And I was able to reach her in a way that nobody else could. And I knew this is why you went through what you went through. Because even if it's just that one person that I could help, I was still able to reach her and touch her life in a way that nobody else could at that time. And so I remember sitting there and I could kind of feel the looks from my friends, like, what? Like, what do you mean? They'd never known of that before. And I didn't go into much detail, but I told her, like, I'm here for you. If nobody else is here for you, I am. And so don't be afraid, whatever time of day or night, if you need to talk, like, I will be there for you. And I remember her telling me that she was going to therapy for it as well, but like her therapist was also dismissing the experience and basically telling her, like, get over it. And that's the last thing you want to tell somebody who's been through something traumatic. Get over it. Because it's a process. Healing doesn't just happen overnight. It's a process. And for some, it takes longer. And so we'd have conversations here and there, her and I, about what happened. And she'd come to me in moments of weakness where she would feel like just residual effects of what was happening. And to this day, I'm still able to help her out in those times because we went through a similar experience, but I'm able to validate her feelings and say, look, I get it. I feel that. I went through that. And so when I was talking about this with Jeremy and kind of telling him my story, he was like, so many times people go through traumatic experiences, but they say, I would do it all over again if I could just help that one. And I feel that on such like an emotional and deep level. Like I would go through that all over again if it meant that I'm the woman that I am today and that I could help just that one person. And I don't believe that it's going to stop there. I'm going to school to be a teacher, and so many of the times in your schools you see effects of abuse, and whether it's sexual, emotional, neglect, physical. And so I know that I'm confident that that's not just one person that I'm going to reach, that I'm still going to be able to reach others. And God is going to use my story for good because he always does. Another scripture that I found was Psalm 40, verse 3. It's kind of a verse that I found when I finished therapy, and I had to like look through old journals to find it, but it speaks so much to me. It says, he put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. When I was able to realize that that abuse was not my fault and that I did nothing to deserve or cause that to happen, there was a new song in my mouth. There was praise because I was saved from that experience. And I knew that I was going to touch lives. And then it was just a few years later that I was able to touch that one. And I know that there will be more. So it's still been a journey. It's not a perfect story. Because of the separation and the divorce, there were a lot of negative effects for my family, a lot of which we're still dealing with today. I pretty much have a non-existent relationship with my brother, which is probably the hardest part of it all. He's still really angry at us for what happened. He doesn't know about what happened to me. He's still too young for that at the time. But sometimes it's really frustrating. You know, certain days it's more frustrating than others that my stepdad gets to live his life normally, and we're still suffering with those effects. My brother is suffering, my mom is suffering, I'm still dealing with that. And so it's frustrating because sometimes it can feel like there's no justice. You know, like he got away with that. Okay. But in those times I have to remind myself of who I am despite who he is as well. And I have to remind myself, like, you are better because of what happened. And if anything, like, I need to just focus on myself and the healing and the restoration that I found. So again, it's not perfect. And I remember when I was going through all of this and I was going through my healing process, I remember just being kind of sad that I already didn't know my biological father. I'd probably never have a relationship with him. Don't even know where to begin to find him if I wanted to. But I was given a second opportunity with my stepdad. And once all this happened and I realized that I wasn't going to have a relationship with this man anymore, it's kind of sad, you know, like I don't get to have father-daughter dates growing up, you know, in adulthood. I won't have this man to walk me down the aisle or have a dance with me at my wedding. And I remember just feeling really sad that I was going to miss out on that. But God is a good God. And He's placed other men in my life to fill that role. The same friends that I was at when I met this girl or had this experience with this girl, I had been friends with them for years. But I never knew, and they never knew, just how much I would need them in my process. They're the kind of family that opens their arms to anybody. And probably the most underrated relationship in that family is the one that I have with their dad. And that is a man that God has used to touch my life. He's an example of a father's love for his daughter. I'm able to look at the way that he loves his wife and look at the way that he loves his daughters, and I know that's good. That is a good love. And he loves me the same. And that's been huge for me. He doesn't know what I went through. He doesn't know how much I needed a dad. He just loved me like the way he loves his daughters. He had no idea how it would impact my life and how much I needed a father's love. I'm also dating a really great man who's shown me kindness and goodness. He's so patient with me. That is good love. And I have an amazing relationship with his family and his dad, and that is good love. Where these men can have called me their daughter, just out of love, but they don't know what that means to me. That they have, without hesitation, stepped into this void that I've had in my life without knowing previous experiences, without knowing my story. They just do it out of the goodness of their heart. And God has used them because He is a good and merciful God. So just to kind of close, I'm going to go over one more scripture that I have. It says, I will exalt you, Lord. You lifted me out of the depths and did not let my enemies gloat over me. Lord, my God, I called to you for help, and you healed me. You, Lord, brought me up from the realm of the dead. You spared me from going down to the pit. Sing the praises of the Lord, you, his faithful people. Praise his holy name. For his anger lasts only a moment, but his favor lasts a lifetime. Weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. I spent a lot of years weeping. I mean, I have acknowledged what had happened to me, but I was suffering those years that I kept that secret. It was hard to keep a secret like that. And I was dealing with this pain. Whether I acknowledged that pain or not, I was dealing with it. But joy always comes in the morning. And God touched my life, and I'm thankful for him, and I'm thankful for what he's done in my life, and I'm excited to see the lives that I'll be able to touch through my experience.
That was so great. I want to pray for Ashley because I believe exactly what she said. I believe that her life will change many others, that this is just the beginning. So if you guys would you bow your heads? Heavenly Father, thank you for Ashley. Thank you for her willingness to share. And thank you for being a good father to her. Not letting her go, but reaching out to her through people who may not even know how much of an impact they've made in her life. God, I pray that she would make a huge impact on others' lives. Thank you for her opportunities already. Thank you for the outlook that you've given her. Thank you for the truth that you've instilled in her. And God, I pray that we get to see a harvest of lives changed because of her willingness to serve you and open up and share her story. We ask these things in your name. Amen.